Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I can't believe this is episode 142. We have done so many of these and I just love them. I love the feedback you give and the comments you send. Please let us know if you have topics you'd like covered. We would be so happy to talk about anything you want to talk about. If you have ideas for guests, let me know. We just want this to be useful for you guys. So please, feedback is really welcomed anytime. So we have an important issue to talk about. So I've been stewing on this for about the past, several weeks. It's the phrase DEI Hire. Now, you've heard this used in a lot of different contexts, okay? Do you remember when that Baltimore bridge collapsed? And there was a gentleman who was in charge of the bridge traffic and the harbor traffic, a person of color, and somebody said, not just somebody, several somebody said, oh, he was a DEI hire. As if that had anything to do with the accident, which was a disaster. Of course, it was horrible. But the answer was the person at the controls was a DEI hire. We've heard it in this presidential election, right? Kamala Harris is a DEI hire. What does that even mean? I don't care if you want to vote for her or you don't, or you're a Trump supporter. That's great. That's the beauty of this country, right? Everybody has the choice to make the choice they want, at least in terms of who they're going to vote for president. But to demean someone as being a DEI hire, the problem is this term has become part of the vernacular. And I hear it being used in workplaces. Oh, well, let's not promote him. He's a DEI hire. I don't know about her performance. You know, she was a DEI hire. And what most people mean is, well, they were part of a recruiting effort, maybe. Or we decided that we needed more women or more people of color or more this or more that. And it's so interesting to me because the people who use the term DEI hire actually are engaging in the same conduct, right? So by identifying the person or the group responsible for the Baltimore bridge disaster as a DEI hire, right? One of them as a DEI hire, you're engaging in discrimination. You don't think people's color and race come into play in presidential elections? You bet they do. Right? The vice presidential candidates for both of our presidential candidates were chosen in big part, based on who they are and who they can bring in and who they connect with. So from that perspective, I guess they're all DEI hires, right? It just doesn't make sense. And it worries me because I feel like we're going backwards. Equal employment opportunity is the touchstone of equality and fairness and equity in the workplace. Nobody should ever be referred to as a DEI hire or a DEI promotion. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and by the way, the idea of access, right? Somebody who is able to be active in the workplace, even though they may have a disability or they may have a religious belief that needs to be accommodated. Those are terms we use to create a better workplace, a workplace where people are not judged unfairly based on what they look like or where they come from or what their first language was. And I thought we were making progress in this area. I thought we all understood what that meant. We don't have situations anymore where we have a hiring list for a city, and we pass up very qualified people on that list to get to the person of color or the woman because we need more of them. That's now illegal. The United States Supreme Court doesn't allow that. And in my opinion, they shouldn't. we practice DEI at the recruiting level, not at the decision-making level. We have to go out there and get more diverse candidates, people who have different perspectives, different viewpoints for our jobs, different ways of solving problems. They bring different skills to the table. That is where our DEI efforts are going to be put, focused, right? Is bringing more qualified people to the table for consideration. We don't break ties based on somebody's race or color or sex or national origin. There's no such thing as a tie when you're making a hiring decision. There will always be a way you can distinguish between two candidates, right? Somebody's got more experience. Somebody has more practical education. Somebody has done the job before. There's always a way to distinguish. You don't need to break a tie based on a protected category. When you do, that's discrimination. And that's what the U.S. Supreme Court has said. So we have to be careful with our language. We have to be careful with what we're communicating with these terms. So DEI hire is a pejorative term, right? It's derogatory. It's negative. The way people are using it right now in this election, in this time, right? It's not just about the election. We've talked about the bridge. We can even talk about the horrible assassination attempt of President Trump. What happened when we started looking at what the United States Secret Service did? And somebody had to testify, happened to be a woman in front of Congress. What did we hear? Oh, she was a DEI hire. She was eminently qualified for the job. I don't know what happened that day. I don't have any access to that information, but nobody put her in charge of the Secret Service just because she's a woman. Just like nobody put the guy in charge of the bridge traffic just because he's a person of color. It just doesn't make sense. Now, I understand that in politics, things are a little bit different, right? So in politics, I heard President Biden say, I want to find an African-American woman for my vice president back in 2020. Okay, there was a speech where he said that. And so I suppose someone could say, okay, well, he was looking at a group of people, but he picked the most qualified person he thought, right? He picked the person he thought was most qualified. So to say now 4 years later, after somebody has been in that role, that they're a DEI hire, we're not using the term right. There are lots of complaints that people can make about everyone who's running for president and everybody who's a vice president. And the person who was in charge of traffic in the Baltimore harbor and the head of the Secret Service. How did someone get a shot at a former president of this country? Yes, it's happened before, but it should never happen again. How did it happen? These are legitimate questions people should be asking. But we delegitimize the process when we make it about a DEI hire. Don't let your leaders use this language at work. I know it's being used in the vernacular, but we can't use it in the workplace. Nobody is a DEI hire. Nobody is a DEI promotion. DEI is a process. It's something we do to make sure we have the most diverse people on our organization who can serve our diverse clients and our diverse communities. That's all it is. It's about not taking people out of consideration because of their race or their color or their sexual orientation or their religious belief. Now, can we take them out because they don't speak the right language? You bet. You bet. Can we take them out because they don't have the right skill? Sure. Speaking a language is a skill. But this is where diversity, equity, and inclusion has become so complicated. We get all these messages out there in the public. We have the United States Supreme Court giving us some really different language when it comes to DEI in the university cases that came out several months ago, right, about university admissions. So I understand why it's tricky, but this is why we've got to do our homework. You have to make sure you're describing DEI appropriately in your organization. You're using the right terms. You're catching people when they are not using the right terms and correcting them. You're not allowing the term DEI to be used as a derogatory or negative label for someone. You can label people all day long based on their skills and their performance and their ability to do their job, but not based on protected categories, not based on who they are, or as the United States Supreme Court has said, immutable characteristics, things that either we can't change about ourselves or we shouldn't have to change about ourselves. So when you're rolling out your equal employment opportunity compliance programs, don't avoid the tough subjects. Don't say, well, I'm not going to talk about DEI. It's so controversial right now. I don't know. I think we should just skip it. You can't. You've got to hit the hard topics head on. Figure out how DEI works in your organization. How are you going to talk about it? How are you going to use it? How are you going to defend it to detractors? That's your job in human resources, in employee relations, in labor relations, in personnel, right? And in your legal department, right? You have to think about, how are we going to continue recruiting the best and the brightest, no matter what they look like, no matter where they're from, no matter what their first language was, and not discriminate against other people in the process. It's a fine line, but it's not as fine as you might think it is. So let's lead with positive examples. Let's make sure in our organizations, we're not afraid to talk about DEI. We have a policy that is tailored for our organization. You can't use one size fits all when it comes to DEI. It has to be tailored. It has to be scripted for what you do and how you do it and what your culture is and what your workplace demographics are, where you're located. Those are all critically important, but don't ignore it, right? We've come a long way in promoting equality at work. Are we there yet? No, we haven't fixed the problem. Certainly this political campaign is telling us that, right? But we can do better in our workplace. We can do better by leading by example, having policies that are very clear about these topics. And again, holding people accountable, even if they're at the top of the organization. Not being afraid to say, hey, that's not appropriate. And here's the way we're going to do it. Let's talk about it together as a group. Let's collaborate and let's think about how we want to discuss DEI, how we want to discuss the concept of a diverse workplace and why it is so important and why it is absolutely critical to the success of any organization today. That we make decisions for the right reasons, for legitimate business reasons. And not for reasons that are rooted in racism or sexism or unfair stereotypes. It's hard. It's not easy, but we can do it. And we need to show our kids and our communities what it is to do this correctly, to do it right, to make sure that everyone is getting opportunity. Even people who traditionally have the upper hand, okay? They deserve equal employment opportunity too. Everybody does. And you have to think of it that way in the workplace. Your political views are yours. Your religious beliefs are yours. Your cultural beliefs and values are yours. But in the workplace, you have to figure out how to do what is expected for your organization, regardless of your personal views, regardless of what you might feel or hear or believe. And I know it takes energy. And I know that I struggle with it just as much as anybody else does. But it is so important to be able to take a step back and really look at what is going on out there in society, what is on TikTok, what is on Facebook, what we're hearing on the evening news, and filter it for the workplace. Make sure we're doing it better. We're doing it right. We're doing it in a way that is fair, that is equitable, and that gets us the best people to serve our clients, our patients, our vendors, our students. That's our obligation, and that should be our commitment to the workplace. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I know this is a topic that is controversial and tough, but I hope you will take my comments in the spirit in which they were intended. We got to do it right at work. We absolutely have to. And I know you can do it, and most of you are doing it. So keep up the good work. And if you see an opportunity area that you can fix, get in there and get it done. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and go out and do something nice for someone. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.